I was parked across the street from the marigold ribbon and the cluster of cameras, fingers wrapped around a sweating cup of sweet tea, as August pressed its warm hand against the windshield. You could smell the heat rising off the brand new sidewalk and the sugar smoke coming from the big smoker they'd hauled onto the curb for the spectacle. My ex-husband stood under a rented archway of blooms, like he was a mayor, smiling with all those straight teeth I paid orthodontists for. On either side of him, council members waited for their photo. The neighborhood association president fanned herself, and a drone hovered above, as if hope had rotors. The sign over the awning read Bishop and Bloom, a name that used to wake me at night like a song I'd written and couldn't remember the words to. From where I sat, the letters looked like they were floating in the air, pinned to a blue Atlanta sky that had never asked anyone to be kind, only to keep going. A chalkboard on the sidewalk advertised the special: gold leaf chicken and honey-drizzled cornbread, the kind of pretty food that photographs better than it fills you. To his left was Kira Bloom herself, the food blogger who'd reinvented herself as a partner in curated dining experiences, which is a long way to say girl, who learned how to sell other people's recipes to people who wanted to eat a narrative. She was golden, and 19 minutes late, hair like a champagne curtain, smiling for a camera as if a life could be edited later. Somewhere in that crowd, I knew my daughter was here too, tucked behind oversized sunglasses and calculation, as much a spectator as I was. I felt the ignition key warm in my palm and told my breath to mind its business. 2 weeks before today, the man cutting that ribbon texted me. The way men text, when they think softness is a pillow, they can fluff whenever they like. I'm moving forward. Nia, he'd said. I want new energy. I'm tired of carrying dead weight. He never could resist dressing up cruelty in the language of wellness. The new energy had a face, a brand, and a ring set he'd posted precariously near a Capri Sun. Somewhere you have to fly over more water than hurt. The old weight, as he called it, sat now in a 10-year-old Camry with a dented bumper and a paper bag of legal documents riding shotgun, feeling lighter than I had in years. I didn't come to make a scene. I came to watch the end of a story he'd written and realize I no longer belonged to a Taz. I came because there is a peace that lives in knowing the truth and letting it work. I came because 7 months ago, I decided not to be a woman a man could throw away. Back then, when the church still smelled like pine from Christmas and the city was salted with gray skies, Marcus started telling me about the vision. That man has always loved a vision. In our 20s, his visions stretched longer than my edges. A food truck, a bistro, a catering company in a converted warehouse. In our 30s, those visions woke up early to be ironed, packed lunches, tuition déposée, and a mortgage. In our 40s, a different hunger arrived at our table and asked to be served first. I am not naive. I've been alive too long not to know how love can go quiet, but I did not expect indifference to be a knife that dull. So quiet, you don't notice your heart bleeding until it stains the rug. He started spending late nights at tastings, every time I asked if the we in our plan was still us. He used my concern, like it was a pothole he could swerve. The day I found our recipe notebook, the leather one with water stains shaped like continents missing from the shelf, he said he'd taken it to protect it. He pressed a kiss to my cheek. Quick as a coin tossed in a fountain. Men like Marcus will stand inside what you built. Hold a lounge chair, and then tell you they erected the house because they dragged it across the living room one afternoon. I had been writing my way out of that marriage for years. If I'm honest, not on paper on the backs of invoices and the sides of jars, and the way I moved through a kitchen that had my mother's laugh baked into the countertops. I started Bishop's barbecue sauce when Malik still toddled in footy pajamas and Imani wore barrettes that clicked when she ran. I cooked the first batch in a dented stock pot on a stove that bent prayers into steam. I was the one who carried jars to barbershops and salons, who smiled through rejections and ugly labels, who registered a business license at a folding table where a woman in a polyester vest asked if I knew the difference between a DBA and an LLC. I knew the difference between everything and nothing. He knew how to shake hands and tell stories that started with we and ended with me. When Kira arrived at first, just a face on a screen with captions and lighting, Marcus began to look at me like a piece of furniture that had been charming in its day. The day he introduced her as a creative partner, I laughed in the pantry where no one could see. Softly, like I'd discovered a secret door. He told me they'd be launching a new sauce line under the Bishop and Bloom banner. He called the recipes our classics. I tasted metal in my mouth and said nothing, because sometimes silence is the knife you sharpen when you know you're going to need it. I kept working. I kept taking care of customers who called me baby and ma'am, and the sauce lady. I kept one eye on the books and the other on the street. I hired a new accountant, Gloria Baptiste, a woman with a silver bob sharp as a good blade, and a laugh that made strangers put their hands on their chests. The first meeting, she took off her glasses, looked me in the face, and said, "We ain't hiding nothing. Mrs. Bishop, we're planting." I nodded and signed papers as if I were writing to a future me, a woman with a tide in her spine. Gloria told me to separate everything. She taught me the difference between messy and illegal, and how men with a gift for charm often leave receipts behind their smiles. I filed trademarks. I filed copyrights on that sauce book I wrote, with Mama's notes in the margins like little prayers and jokes. I changed distribution contracts to protect our formulas under my maiden name, because the only thing that would be his forever was the story he told himself when he looked in the mirror. I started something new. 2. Calling up women I fed and trusted, asking them to put a little cash into a cooperative I named Salt and Light. A seamstress, a teacher, a nurse, a woman who laid tile like it was a language, 10 of us. Each with enough to burn our fingers if it went wrong and enough to change our street if it went well. We bought our first piece of land, a derelict brick building on a corner, with a maple tree that dropped leaves like confetti. Let it be ours. I prayed over that tree, over the broken glass, over the busted awning. Meanwhile, Marcus left. He packed slow, as if it hurt him to pull drawers open, and said things like, "You'll always be a part of me," to a woman he had already written out of his new life's prologue. He said I had gotten heavy. I wanted to tell him my heaviness was made of labor and love and soup that kept people alive when they were broke. But I watched the door close, then watched the house become very quiet. When a man who has made you a mother in every way leaves, the house yawns. The first night, I let it yawn. The second, I slept like a stone dropped in a river, and woke smoothed. It is a myth that every woman who leaves must go somewhere else. Sometimes you stay, and the geography moves around you. I braced myself and started talking to attorneys and lenders and city clerks whose nameplates were crooked. I bought the building that used to be his dream. A landlord tired of the fuss sold it to Salt and Light for less than the price of his boat. The ink dried while Marcus and Kira posted videos of themselves tasting pickled okra in Tulum. They cut together reels too perfectly. They should have cut together the contracts that would protect them. I filed the paperwork for a culinary incubator for women of color, and named it Ava Mae's Kitchen after my grandmama, who fed 6 kids and most of the neighborhood on a smoker. She coaxed from a converted oil drum. The city loved the press release about entrepreneurship and heritage. The council members loved photographs and re-election. By spring, my kitchen was filled with other women's recipes and laughter. A vegan baker who had been told repeatedly that black folks don't care about dairy-free girl. Please made tea cakes so tender they felt like apologies in your mouth. A Haitian mom whipped pickles that woke people all the way down to their sins. A grandmother, with hands like river stones, taught the girls that the right shrimp and the right patience will make people cry. We put their names on the wall in gold letters not because they needed gold, but because the world needed it spelled out. I ate better than I had in years. I laughed in a way that wasn't careful. I wore bright lipstick and kept the heat down because I could. I stopped searching for the mirror I had once lived in. Men came to fix things and smiled at me like they had learned why the sun rises. I learned to say no without moving my mouth. Marcus wanted the building back. He did not know he'd sold his future when he left me, because he believed futures were dreams, not deeds. They shot their cute were cleaning up a neighborhood vlog outside of their space without realizing the permit on the door wasn't their name. They sent a blossomy press kit to the city, and the city sent it to me, because my name sat under owner. He asked for a lease. I gave him a short one, a month to month, with a key man clause and a morality clause that would make a sermon blush. I gave him rope because some men only recognize an edge when it tightens. He renovated with borrowed money and a borrowed smile. Staged everything like a wedding. The day before his big opening, Gloria slid a folder across my table. The same hands that had ushered me toward the cliff months ago, now brimming with parachute. They used your recipes, she said, eyes warm and dangerous, down to the ounce. They printed it like you wrote it for them. We had a nice laugh at that. We filed a motion, crisp as a new dollar. We had a clause that said any product derived from my intellectual property needed a license signed by me, and the name Bishop could not be used to sell what I wrote unless it sat next to the name Jones. My name. He'd never bothered to learn what that meant legally. Because learning can be hard for men convinced that charm is a credential, I called the women and told them to meet me after closing, that we had work to do. They came with their aprons still dusted in flour, and their hair wrapped in fabric that could make a museum jealous. We mopped and prayed and taped our flyers to the doors. We wrote them in 3 languages because half of us waiting on miracles speak 2 at once. Ava Mae's Kitchen Collective opens its doors this Sunday. The flyer said, a space for women who feed communities to build legacies. Down at the bottom was a picture of a pot with steam rising like a gospel note, and, in smaller letters, we put the right names on the recipes here. I did not sleep the night before his opening, because some wars end at dawn and some start there. I imagined going back to the way he had a way of pulling me into his orbit with his hands and that smile. I let the image knock, and then told it the kitchen was closed. When the sun rose over the sycamore that still hadn't given up on this block, I dressed in a white linen dress that made me feel like I was both blessing and blade. The plaza looked like a film set by Tena M. Someone had placed glossy succulents in places where real plants refused to grow. My phone buzzed with texts from condolences disguised as curiosity. I sipped my tea and waited. The ribbon cutting went off on schedule because the city loves schedules. They cut. Cameras clicked. The drone pivoted to catch the kiss where Kira reached up like a bridesmaid kissing the groom for practice. Marcus turned to say something into a microphone about uplift and legacy and community. And that was when a sheriff's deputy stepped delicately around the succulents and handed him an envelope the size of an answer. You've been served, the deputy said. As polite as a smile in church, I could almost hear the words hit his hand. It takes a certain kind of man to treat a crowd like a mirror. He tried to keep talking while he opened it. He got to the part about injunction, and his eyes stuttered. When he reached cease and desist, his mouth forgot its job. Kira tried to laugh it off. Even as her eyes hopped like a trapped sparrow, the council member on my side of the aisle stepped back, worried about optics. A cameraman close enough to smell the man's cologne captured the moment somebody changes shape. The door behind him stayed locked, because the lease allowed me to suspend access in the event of legal action. The drone hovered, then slid away, uninterested in truth because truth is terrible television. Across the street, I put on my sunglasses and checked the time. At noon, our locksmith worked fast and familiar. At 12:05, our sign light wood and hand-painted letters rasped up the facade like a choir warming up. The gold letters caught June's sun and spelled out a different future. Ava Mae's Kitchen Collective. People turned because names are bells. A line formed beneath our awning, like it had been waiting its whole life. I stepped out of the car and walked into the heat of it. People I didn't know hugged me like I belonged to their childhood. Imani watched from the crowd, her phone in her back pocket for once, her face messy with a feeling she wasn't ready to name in public. I caught her eye just long enough for both of us to inhale the same breath. I didn't wave. She didn't either. Some bridges aren't ready to hold the weight yet. Marcus called me 37 times that afternoon. He left messages that began with Nia. Let's not do this. Dipped into, you're ruining me. Then swam all the way down to, after all I've done for you. Because men who blueprinted themselves as architects must convince you, your bricks came from their blood. I stopped listening when he started offering me percentages of a thing I already owned. We fought in court because some endings require that theater. He brought a suit with 1,000 pages and a Twitter thread under his arm. His lawyer was a boy who had never been poor enough to know how pride tastes, slick hair, and a pen held like a sword. We brought recipes and receipts and the stories our grandmothers told us when they had to hide money in the sugar jar because love alone was not keeping lights on. Gloria slid our filings across that polished table, like she was dealing spades on a porch in July, and then sat back to watch men. Pretend money was a mystery. My favorite part of that week was watching a judge in a gray suit take off his glasses to read the line where it said the sauces and the stories belong to me legally, morally, ancestrally. He gave an injunction that sang, at least to my lawyer's ears, freeze this. Stop that. See me in 30 days. And in the meantime, the brand called Bishop means the woman it was written on. Marcus made a face you rarely see in men. After 5, they call it learning. Kira went very still and calculated her escape from a house she had only just furnished online. The internet did what the internet does. People picked sides they didn't understand and piled words on them like laundry. I was a hero to women who had discovered too late that loving a man and building with him are 2 different occupations. I was a villain to men who think losing is a synonym for she cheated. I watched none of it. Every afternoon, I walked my block with a broom and introduced myself to whoever lived under the willow tree. I took out the trash and got quotes for awning repairs and tasted a sauce a girl from Nigeria had made with enough cayenne to bring me back from the dead. I slept in a bed that no longer had to hold another person's regret. Imani didn't speak to me for a month. To her, I'd blown up a brand that could have put her face on a billboard. She had been building content around the Bishop family legacy she liked to toss in her captions, like a sprig of cilantro. She called me controlling, selfish, vindictive. I called her and told her how much I loved the girl who wore barrettes shaped like butterflies. She hung up on me 3 times and texted me a picture of a dishwasher at our incubator with a caption that said, "You could have told me." The truth is, I didn't tell her because she was her father's daughter when it came to liking the taste of shiny things. The truth is, I didn't want to argue with a version of my own face. Marcus tried once, late one night, to stand outside my new building with a bottle of whiskey, an apology, and a story about God. I buzzed the door and told him the kitchen was closed, but the church down the street had office hours if he wanted to cry in a font. He called me the next morning and told me I was cruel. I told him I was tired. Sometimes those words are cousins. The trouble with winning on paper is your heart doesn't always sign the last page. You still wake up, sometimes, at 3 a.m., in a tangle of your own memory, and want to text the old ache to see if it still lives at the same address. I learned to roll over and rub that soft place behind my left ear and tell my body we weren't going anywhere. I hung a photo of my grandmother over the stove, her face wrinkled with laughter, a cigarette pinched in fingers that had just pulled bread from a miracle. People asked if it kept the kitchen safe. "It keeps the recipes honest," I said, and they nodded like they understood. A month later, the day the court turned our temporary into a ruling with stamps, my phone buzzed with a number I recognized and didn't. It was my daughter. She started crying before the greeting was out. She'd been going live, she said, to talk about women's empowerment and resilience. And halfway through, she realized she was making an altar out of a story she hadn't healed from. She wanted to know if I could meet for coffee. I wanted to ask if she could meet me in a grocery store aisle instead, where the real conversations happen between head lettuce and the person you used to be. I said yes, because growth looks ridiculous if you don't feed it. She showed up with her hair in a bun and no lashes. For the first time in months, my child looked 24. She held my hand like we were crossing the street. "He told me you were making a power play," she said, voice small enough to slip under the door. "Of course he did," I said. "That man has always been allergic to owning his mess." She laughed, then cried, then asked me how I could be so calm. "Baby, I am not calm. I am determined. There is a difference." We sat for hours and talked about recipes and men, and why women stay too long at tables where they are both the meal and the plate. I told her about the money, not the dollar amounts that's gossip, but where it goes when you decide to invest in a neighborhood instead of in men's futures that never include you. I talked about the cooperative and how 10 women putting $25 together every week felt like a choir learning a new song. I watched my daughter hear me not as a mother but as a woman. When we parted, we hugged, and she whispered, "I'm sorry," into the space under my ear. I whispered, "Me too." Marcus met me in mediation 6 weeks later and offered me a partnership if I'd pretend the internet had misunderstood the paperwork. I thanked him for the comedy and told him God might yet make a comedian of him. He was finally learning timing. He tried to angle for a check and some face-saving language. I told him I was fresh out of makeup for men's egos. He took the deal. That meant he kept his grill, his knife set, and his credit cards with interest. I kept the company, the recipes, the building, and my name. He still texts me when there's a holiday he thinks is an excuse. I text back with links to jobs in logistics. I do not wish him harm. I wish him enough quiet to hear himself. He calls Ava Mays that place. Like the kitchen offended him personally. I remind him that the kitchen is a country where women are presidents every day. And the press secretaries all smell like smoke. He sends me the occasional sad selfie of a new sauce label he's working on. I tell him to pay a designer and stop using Canva like it's a god. The thing no one tells you about leaving is that time becomes a door you keep opening. You find whole afternoons where you do what you want just because you want it. And you think, good God, why didn't I leave sooner? I planted a rosemary bush in a big half barrel and called it therapy. I got on a plane with my sister and went to a town with colored houses stacked like books. And I did not call to check on anyone's dinner. I bought a dress that cost more than rent used to and wore it for no reason, other than I looked like the answer. Then, last week, a woman named Miss D came in with a pie and a story. She'd been baking out of her church kitchen for 30 years, selling slices after service to fund choir robes. She wanted to see if we had room for one more stove. One more dream. Her pie crust was a sermon so good. You want to tithe. She cried when I told her the rent was a fraction of what she'd been paying. The landlord who kept forgetting to fix her fan, I cried too. Because sometimes the world is mean, and sometimes it is exactly like this. What sustains me now is the look on a woman's face when she tastes her own independence and realizes no one can ever take that seasoning from her again. And, yes, the pettier parts of me still take joy in the knowledge that the lid of my life seals tight, too tight for hands that do not know where the knob is. I am not above satisfaction. I am finally allowed to be human. The day the first mural went up on our wall, a boy on a bike skidded to a stop to watch. He squinted at the colors. All that bright story plastered onto the ugly brick like forgiveness. He didn't recognize the faces right away. Women with aprons and gold hoops and flour on their arms. Grandmothers and girls. Who they supposed to be? He asked. The artist? A kid with paint on his sneaker and sweat crawling down his temple said, they, us. The boy nodded like someone had handed him a new word and the correct way to say it. I still think of that afternoon in the car sometimes. Marigold ribbon snapping. That drone buzzing like an insect that forgot how to die. Marcus opening an envelope under the word bloom and finding out how paper can end a fantasy without tearing. People ask me if I was happy then. If seeing his face drop was worth the stomach I had carried for months. Happiness is a word for birthdays and naps. What I felt in that moment was belonging to myself. Finally, totally, the way your own name tastes when you say it in a quiet room. That feeling is not a party. It is a ceremony where you are both officiant and bride. This city is full of women who have been told their recipes are sweet, but their names are optional. We are changing that block by block, jar by jar. On Saturdays, I drag a chair out front and watch folks eat. Imani sits beside me sometimes, half on her phone, half in her life, and tells me about a marketing plan for the women inside. She uses words like scale and brand values, and then wipes powdered sugar from her mouth, like she caught herself praying. We go home smelling like smoke and nutmeg. We sleep hard. In the morning, I open my eyes, reach for no one, and grin into my own quiet. So here's what I learned. And if you're sitting somewhere in a parked car watching a man decide who you should be, maybe you can borrow it. Sometimes, the sweetest revenge is not destruction, but harvest. You learn where the law puts the fence, and you plant anyway. You name your work after a woman who never got to see hers named. You build a table long enough to seat the people who actually feed you. You put your own apron on the wall when you're done, and go home honest tired. You forgive yourself for staying too long and celebrate yourself for leaving at all. You pick up your name where you dropped it, and carry it home like a loaf of bread you baked yourself, cooling on the counter in a kitchen. Finally yours. And when yesterday knocks at your door in its new suit and cologne, you pour it a glass of water, thank it for getting you here, and then politely invite it to use the exit. If this story fed you even a little, show some love, like, share, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what you're building. Your voice might be the seasoning somebody else needs.